I'm Christopher Wickert. I'm Associate Editor at Journal Management Studies. And today I want to give an answer to the question of what characterizes a good paper in JMS. What do we want to see as editors of the journal? A good paper is basically bold but grounded. What does that mean? Bold means that it breaks new ground in the way we think about a certain phenomenon. It stretches the boundaries how we looked at something before, but at the same time it's closely anchored and grounded in an existing conversation, right? So what does that mean more specifically? A great paper should, beyond a threshold level of methodological and theoretical rigor, have three features, and these are: is it new, is it interesting, and is it important? So what does that mean? What do we mean by new? New is a relative thing, of course, but basically you want to answer the key question of what do I know after reading your paper that I didn't know before? Assume the reader knows the relevant literature. So what are you putting on the table that hasn't been there before? What I said, new is a relative thing, so few things are absolutely new, new in an absolute sense, but they're new relative to a conversation, or you're taking a new theoretical perspective on an existing phenomenon, or the reverse. You're using a theory for a phenomenon to explain and understand a phenomenon that hasn't been used before, and thus you're providing a fresh perspective on something that hasn't been looked in this or that way. You could see it as when you kind of think about what are research questions that you can ask that are new, of the red ocean versus the blue ocean, so to say. So red ocean research questions or topics are basically things that have been researched to death. Nobody seems to care about it. And you have a problem if you are the only person that cares about your research, because you're actually writing your paper for an audience. They have to care as well. So ideally you care just as much as everyone else seems to care. And that's a blue ocean topic, so to say. So blue ocean things are that these are phenomena or theoretical perspectives which are at the top of the conversation, right? Everyone thinks they are important. Everyone is excited to hear more about this or that stuff. And that's the kind of things you want to look at. Do I have something to offer for a specific phenomenon where people would say, okay, we need to know more about this. That's, for example, the impacts of digitalization, which can be positive or negative. Things like the Sustainable Development Goals, which are new on the agenda, and there's a lot of things to say from a corporate or managerial perspective. So I would say these are some examples of blue ocean research questions, and red ocean research questions are things like, well, do you want to be the 150th study that examines the link between CSR and performance, for example? Do people really still care about that? Or maybe is it much more difficult than to convince people that this is something new, this is something novel, I can contribute to the conversation? The next factor is interesting. Well, how do you make a paper interesting? That's of course relative again, but what would academics likely consider interesting? Interesting papers are typically those that go beyond gap spotting. Like, hey, here's another mediating or moderating factor that explains performance a little bit better. Is that really interesting? Do we need to know more about that? Or are there not other topics which are more refreshing and we want to hear more about that? So interesting topics typically emerge from a thorough problematization of the literature, where, for example, you identify some assumptions underlying a particular conversation or literature and you try to challenge them. So, for example, everyone thinks A causes B, and your data actually shows that, well, B can also cause A, something like that. That people are more likely to consider that interesting. So you're challenging conventional wisdom about a topic. You challenge the reader to think differently about the topic and not just adding a little further nuance to it. The last factor is important, right? New, interesting, and important. What is important? What I said before, do we really need more studies that explain firm performance a little bit better? There's a lot of research on this, and there's a lot of good and important research, but there are more problems out there in the world, I would say, that deserve our attention more than firm performance, maybe. And these are grand societal challenges such as climate change, inequality, and digitalization, again, things like that, where these are all things that are being managed, and they have managerial implications that they're taking place inside and around organizations. So management theory has a lot to offer to engage with important societal issues. And I think a good paper combines these three things in an optimal way. And as I said in the beginning, it's bold but grounded. You have bold arguments that stretch the way we think about a phenomenon that you identified, but it's clearly grounded in a conversation. It's not standing on its own, but it's anchored to a conversation where you directly speak to scholars that are interested in this, and that way it resonates, and it makes it more accessible to readers if it's grounded. But it makes it more interesting to the readers if it has a certain degree of boldness, where they would say, this is cool, I didn't think about it like that before. So that's what we think at JMS will be a great paper.